asked me to be here. I noticed that the program has an American, a German, sadly an absent Frenchman, and an Englishman, and I'm very pleased to be here, and it's very good to see my friend, the governor. It's also great to be in Bologna again. I used to come here a lot in the 80s and 90s, purely personally to explore this region of Italy, and my wife, who fortunately speaks Italian, is joining me this evening, and we're going to spend some days here. I was asked to speak about Europe's position over the coming decades in the international monetary and financial system. And I'm going to start off very wide, and then I'm going to end up quite concretely with some encouragement for Europe to make some reforms. Ignazio, you may have been there at the handover from Jean-Claude Trichet to Mario Draghi as head of the ECB. The most un-English ceremony imaginable is held. It's a very Germanic ceremony. It lasts for a day. There are about 6 or 7 speeches with an orchestra that plays in between. Helmut Schmidt, who sadly has just passed away, gave one of the most magnificent speeches I've ever heard. It was truly moving. I felt privileged to be there for that. And Chancellor Merkel said some crucial things as well, and I hope it will become apparent why I'm saying this. She made 3 link points. First of all, she said, what a wonderful thing it is to be alive today. With the rise of China, India, Brazil, Mexico, Indonesia, who would have thought that we would have lived to see so much of the world more prosperous than it was? And she came across as completely genuine about that. And then she said, and this is the top table of the future is going to be different, and we Europeans should want to be at that top table because of what we can bring to the world. And then she talked a bit about the German economy and German success, and she rightly celebrated the excellence of German engineering and the profound changes that the Hartz reforms brought to her country, and how Germany was thriving again. And then she made her key point. She looked out to a kind of multinational, certainly multi-European audience, but where the majority of the people were German, and said, and let me tell you, however successful Germany is, Germany cannot be at the top table of tomorrow's world. Only Europe can. And that's right. I'm absolutely sure that's right. I've had a minor experience of this. After the financial crisis, there was a huge reform effort, and I genuinely believe that the most important reforms are those that have come out of the G20 Financial Stability Board effort. And I think the history books in about 25 years' time will show that there was a kind of inner group of 8 who led these reforms, with Mario Draghi then in the chair. And of the 8, 5 were Europeans and 3 were North Americans. Now, the next crisis of that scale, and God help us, let's hope it's longer than 70 years until the next one, this will not be a transatlantic exercise again. This is the last time, I believe, that our world, our transatlantic world, will get the opportunity to redesign global finance, even when it is us that messed it up, and in particular the UK and the United States. And this makes us pause and think, how are we going to be at the top table in finance and monetary affairs, and wider than that in the world to come? And I think it's a way into saying that as the international monetary system changes, we have to remember that the structure and the norms and conventions in the international monetary system are as much a part of geopolitics than they are of economics. And I think I lived in a world where, during a period of economic and financial peacetime, the economists, the finance ministries, and the central banks live over here, and the ministries of defense and the foreign ministries live over there. And I don't think that's the world that we are going to be in over the next 15 to 20 years. And I think it's instructive to look back at the lead up to the Bretton Woods settlement and what the Bretton Woods settlement in the middle 1940s really was. So first of all, America made it a condition of even going up to the splendid hotel in New Hampshire that Britain dissembled its imperial toll-free zone around the world. This is what Secretary of State Hull insisted on. He was quite right. And during those discussions, one of the key things that happened for my country was that the world's reserve currency finally and decisively shifted from being sterling to being the dollar. And people now write books about the negotiations between Harry Dexter White, who turned out splendidly to be a Soviet spy, and John Maynard Keynes, and it's all about the negotiation of economics. And I don't think it was really about that at all. I think too much grander, bigger things happened in the construction of the post-Second World War financial and monetary world. First of all, our continent essentially outsourced defense to the United States. And that was in London, that was part of the deal, the implicit deal. You will now take over the role of defending the world. It shifts from being Pax Britannica to Pax Americana. And yes, the dollar can be unequivocally the world's reserve currency. That part of the deal seems to me to have gone pretty well so far. And actually, the slides that Jeff showed this morning and the slides we saw this afternoon in terms of GDP per capita, I suspect if you adjusted that for quality of life, Europe got a pretty good deal indeed. There's a splendid paper by Bob Gordon from about 20 years ago that says that if you adjust for the fact that America spends an awful lot of its output on defending the world and defending us, and we spend a lot greater share of our output delivering quality goods for quality leisure time. And this country does that absolutely magnificently. That part of the deal seems to have been going pretty well so far. The other part of the deal was much trickier. The other part of the deal, not done around the table in New Hampshire, was oil will be invoiced in dollars, and we, meaning the North Atlantic Alliance, will show a benign eye to the accommodation between the Al Saud family and the Wahhabi sect of Islam. This hasn't gone too well at all. And the reason I say that is it is one of the factors that is going to play out in changing the international monetary system and financial system in the years ahead. And there are at least three, perhaps four things going on that will reshape this world. The first of all, of course, and the most prominent is the rise of China and China's desire for the renminbi to be a reserve currency. And I don't think anybody's got the faintest idea whether that's going to take 25 years or 10 years. But no one should have any doubt whatsoever that this is something that they desire. And I think it would be very strange if they didn't desire it. I'm not sure whether a social planner would wish it upon them, but no, the top dog in the post-enlightened world has wanted their currency to be the currency of the planet. That's exactly what we did. That's exactly what the Americans have done, and it is exactly what China will want to do. Except that, of course, America isn't going to retreat. It's still the most successful dynamic economy in the world, and so at some point, certainly for the younger of you here, you're going to live in a world where there are two reserve currencies competing with each other. And this is quite different from sterling handing over to the dollar. I'm occasionally taken, I live in Harvard now some of the time, and I'm occasionally taken to the sites of the American War of Independence against my country. And people whose families arrived in America, I don't know, in the late 19th century, the early 20th century, splendidly talk about we. And for me, actually, it's a struggle between one bunch of East Anglians and another bunch of East Anglians. And 2 centuries later, when we handed over the world's reserve currency to the dollar, this was amongst friends, even though we'd burnt down their White House in 1812. It's not going to be quite like that next time as the renminbi rises to take its place amongst the dollar. It's a bit more likely to be like the competition between the Reichsmark and the sterling in the latter part of the 19th century. And I don't mean that this will end disastrously, but it was tense as two, in our case, regional superpowers vied for dominance. And this is another reason why it matters that the European economy be a success, so that we can be at that table. I think a world where America and China are facing off to each other will not be as safe a world as a table that contains India and Brazil and Mexico and most of all us. The second thing that's changing is, and this is completely unpredictable, is what's going on in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia is still the world's most important oil producer. It still is close to the United States. It still invoices in dollars, and it is immensely irritated with the United States and with the United Kingdom. It sees itself as in some kind of local existential struggle with Iran and Shiism. And it will make strategic choices which it sees to be in its interests if it survives at all. And some of those could be how it invoices oil, which would be an absolute transformation. If any of you live to see the moment when Saudi Arabia announces that it's invoicing oil in renminbi, you will know that the tectonic plates of the planet have shifted absolutely profoundly. And the third thing that is changing, and around which there is huge uncertainty, as was said on the last panel, is whether or not the euro area will survive. And people talk about this openly in the United States. They talk about it openly in Asia. And to a lesser extent, it's talked about in the United Kingdom as well. So I want to put that as a backdrop for some slightly more technical comments about finance and banking. And the recipe that comes out of what I'm saying is that if the finance ministries and central banks of Europe and the United States don't get closer to their foreign ministries and state departments, we will make great strategic mistakes over the next 25 years. I recently said this in Washington at a dinner, and somebody from the US Treasury Department who has been there 1 year got explosively angry with me. And somebody who'd been in the State Department for 30 years, I was at the Bank of England for 33, came to my rescue and said I was right. I can assure you that in London, the Treasury Department and the Foreign Office are not close to each other. And in the United States, it's actually a bit better, thanks to the White House, but it's not good. Whereas in Beijing, it will be joined up, and it needs to be joined up in our world too. So that is backdrop. Something very strange is happening in the international monetary and financial system. We have thought about it since the Second World War as an international monetary system, first of all based on fixed exchange rates, and then, since Bretton Woods, on floating exchange rates. And as Jeff said this morning, that one of the great lessons of the Asian crisis was that floating exchange rates really seem to be a better idea, that either you float or you unify, which is what the continent of Europe has done. And the crucial part of this is that if you issue your own currency, you have a degree of autonomy. And we're seeing a lot of muddle around this right now. There are people in the United States saying that the Federal Reserve should slow its or delay its tightening of monetary policy because the European economy is weakening again and China is weak. And this is a really bad way of thinking about it. If you're in the Federal Reserve, you should want the ECB to ensure that nominal demand is stimulated in Europe. And you should want the Chinese central bank to be stimulating demand in China, not that you in the Federal Reserve sit in Washington trying to reflate the whole of the world economy. That's what it is to live in a world of floating exchange rates. That paradigm that has served us reasonably well not brilliantly well, but reasonably well for the last 40 years, survives. It is completely different when it comes to banks and finance. And I think this is underappreciated. In a sense, we have thought more coherently about the post-Bretton Woods world of floating exchange rates than we have about a world of freely flowing capital and banks branching and subsidiarizing and being everywhere across the planet. It's sometimes said that financial stability is a public good. I don't think that's quite right. I think it's a common good. It's impossible to exclude people from its benefits, but it's possible to consume it. I can be a financial firm anywhere on the planet, and if I issue debt and leverage up in ways that it's hard for the outside world to detect, I've borrowed cheaply and at the same time made the world more resilient. Everybody has that incentive. They have an incentive both to consume the stability grass, the resilience grass, and to disguise the extent to which they're doing so. And this is not a national phenomenon, this is a global phenomenon. It's a global common good. And that much has been recognized for a long time insofar as we have global standard setting for banks and to a slightly lesser extent for the capital markets. What we don't really have, and we're starting to cure this within Europe, what we don't really have is candor between national authorities about the strength or weakness of their national institutions. Italian banks, just like UK banks or American banks, German banks, are scattered all over the world. The idea that you can supervise an American bank well by sitting in Washington and visiting its offices in Washington is absolutely ludicrous. The idea that you could supervise an Italian bank which operates throughout Central and Eastern Europe without being hugely dependent upon those local supervisors is for the birds. And yet, unless this has changed in the last 2 years since I left office, and you can tell where my money is that it hasn't changed, what you would find around international tables, big or small, is that on the whole people will turn up and say that their banks are okay. And I don't just mean at the moment, I mean in the 1980s or in the 1990s or in 10 years' time. And this is a kind of dangerous form of self-deception because the truth is we can only ensure that our banks are okay by truly working hand in hand with our fellows. There was a great debate at some point, it went to the European Court of Justice, sadly, about some euro area finance that is done in London. It's all turned out happily. I led the negotiations with the ECB about how to solve it, and I said, I genuinely believe that you should be able to see all the information that I can see. Why don't you have my password so that you can log into our system as me? And then you can be absolutely assured that you will see the same information as me. Nothing like that remotely goes on, and yet it will have to in the periods ahead. And this matters especially for this part of the world, because everybody looks at this part of the world and sees two difficulties. They see a euro area whose architecture was flawed, and a banking system which, until recently at least, has had a series of national champions rather than frank and open collaboration in the supervision. Now, the banking union in that respect is an absolutely major step forward. I think putting supervision in Frankfurt is a fantastic thing to do. Having French people supervise Italian banks, Germans supervise French banks is a terrific thing to do. Now, the UK isn't part of the banking union, but I think the UK, even if it doesn't join the banking union, it could invite Italian, French, German, Japanese, American supervisors to join in the supervision of UK banks. And actually, I think that would be quite a useful thing to do in terms of keeping UK supervisors honest. The bit of the banking union that is, of course, incomplete, and it's topical right now, is there isn't a single deposit insurance scheme. It's still a series of national schemes. And this is often dressed up as a technical issue, but it's much more than a technical issue. If you think about what a monetary union is, it's about having homogeneous money. And a little bit of the money that we carry around is this, the money issued by the ECB. But that's not most of the money that we carry, that we use. Most of the money that we use is money that we hold with banks. It's privately issued money. Except that it's not quite private money, because it's private money with a national backing. And so the monetary union actually has about, how many members of the monetary union are there now? 18 or 19? 18, 19. Yeah, so there are 20. There are 20 euro area currencies. There's the one that Ignazio Mario issue, and then there are 19 series of retail deposit monies. And this means this is one of the many reasons why the monetary union remains fragile, and it's why, in my view, it's absolutely essential to move to a mutual deposit insurance system, which the European Commission are nudging towards this week. Now this, of course, if you're sitting in Berlin, raises the specter of fiscal union, it's the Trojan horse, and of a transfer union. And what is very strange about this debate is the following, is that a transfer union is axiomatically unavoidable, because each night, and actually implicitly each second, everything has to balance across national borders. And it can either balance through this peculiar payment system called target, below the line, and if it goes horribly wrong, the losses get distributed through the ECB capital key, of which Germany has the largest part, but that's below the line, and so is kept away from the public eye, which seems a bit of a mistake if you live in a democracy, or it can be above the line, and everyone can be open about it, and it can be negotiated. And that, of course, is where things are stuck. And the UK came up this morning, and I understand the frustration with the UK, by the way, but the UK referendum isn't going to be the answer to this particular question. Much more important is the French presidential election. That's the biggest thing that we face in our continent, because this business of being stuck on a fiscal union, the way it looks to me at least, is that it can't be broken until Paris can sit alongside Berlin again as the co-chairs of the European project. And that's a technocrat's way of saying something that is a bit pessimistic, which was the tone adopted by Prime Minister this morning. But I don't want to be pessimistic, because there is a great opportunity, and it risks being underexploited. And this is the kind of more practical thing I want to say. The whole debate about the monetary union and its incompleteness turns on this presumption as though the only mechanism of risk transfer in a monetary economy is fiscal, or people moving. And this is not true. This is not true. In the United States, somewhere around 70% to 80% of the risk transfer is through the private capital markets. And here's the way to think about it. I started a business in Massachusetts. All my customers are in Massachusetts. All my suppliers are in Massachusetts. All my employees are in Massachusetts, but my equity holders are in California. And something pretty horrible happens in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts economy takes a hit, and my business is pretty big, let's say, and I go bankrupt. And that exacerbates the Massachusetts downturn because I've laid off all my people, my suppliers have lost a big customer, they're ending up laying off their people. My customers are feeling frustrated, and probably because their workers as well are saving more. But my equity holders are in California, and I just sent a whole load of risk to be absorbed in California. And I deliberately said equity because it's smooth. It doesn't have the characteristic of debt of going like that. And yet the proposals for a capital markets union that are coming out of the Commission are not nothing, but they're not ambitious. And they're not ambitious because somehow the sense is this isn't quite the right moment for being ambitious. And I don't get it. I don't get it. I think it is absolutely hugely in Berlin's interests for this to be an incredibly ambitious endeavor, because this is risk transfer that is priced in the private market. This isn't being underwritten by the German taxpayer. The Germans may invest their savings in businesses in Puglia or in Portugal or in Scotland, outside of the euro area at the moment. And that wouldn't be decided in the Bundestag, and it wouldn't be raising political risk. So I don't understand why they're not pushing for more. And one of the reasons I wanted to raise this is that I think you as Italians, you should be pushing them to do this. And I think there's one thing associated with it that connects back to the last session as well. Jeff's heard me say this before. If I could take one thing from the United States and bring it into Europe, and now I mean the whole of the EU, it would be the US bankruptcy laws. To have a common bankruptcy system across the EU would be great. To have a debtor-friendly bankruptcy system would be fantastic. It is not, people exaggerate when they say of the United States, even the West Coast United States, that there is no stigma to failing. There is a bit of stigma to failing in the United States. I know a few, not many, but I know a few of the big venture capital tycoons on the West Coast, and they say that there is a little bit of stigma to failing, but much less than here or in the UK or in Germany or France. And these are things that we've institutionalized. It's partly in our culture, but our culture is endogenous as well. It's endogenous to the laws that we have and the formal institutions that we have. Now, if you say to people, let's harmonize EU insolvency law, I think that they would wisely reply, this is fantastically ambitious. It's immensely complex. And it is, because there are, I can't remember how many member states of the EU there are. Is it 28 or 29? But, that's a lot of insolvency laws to harmonize. But you don't have to harmonize. You could do something else. You could say, here is a directive that requires all of the national insolvency laws to have the following 3, 4, maybe even half a dozen characteristics. And this would be a very positive thing to do. This would be the kind of thing which, I agree with the former Prime Minister that we need some political leadership, but we also need political leadership that manifests itself in practical things. And actually, when I speak about insolvency law, it sounds dull. But a politician could make this sound exciting because it's about reviving entrepreneurialism. It's about taking away the stigma of failure, just as the Capital Markets Union papers are also technical and dull and have got wrapped up with, is there a spectre of a EU-wide securities regulator? But it isn't about that. It's about people with savings investing in opportunities on the other side of our continent as well as just in the next door town. And that's the kind of thing which over time, endogenously will help to produce a European demos. I actually do think that a single European currency has helped to produce a sense of commonality amongst the people of Europe. You may say this is a peculiar thing for a Brit to say. My in-laws are scattered all over this mainland. I think it has produced a sense of Europeanness. But the idea that issuing money could ever be enough is ridiculous. There have to be things that are woven into different parts of people's everyday lives, their working lives as well as their home lives. And the Holy Grail, of course, would be a single market in services. We've got a single market in goods, but a single market in services in an economy where most output is services would touch people rather more. Now, how does this relate to where I started? In the last session, one of the speakers said that the uncertainty about the prospects of investing in Europe now is high. It is. It is. The recovery in demand might be okay over the next 2 to 3 years, but the trend rate of growth is going to be low. And that in itself is a deterrent to investors around the world. If you're in Harvard, I'm lucky enough, as well as being at the Kennedy School, to be a senior fellow of the Center for European Studies in Harvard. The average age of the incredibly interesting meetings and seminars and lectures at the Center for European Studies, I would say, is around 40. If you go to a session at the China Center, the average age is probably about 19 and a half. If you sit round in cafes, either at the Harvard end of Cambridge or the MIT end of Cambridge, and hear the undergraduates and graduates talking, quite often you hear them planning businesses for themselves, not now, not just after they've left. These kind of famous stories of these tycoons that did it. I mean, it's not surprising that they exist, because actually loads of them are having a go at this, and some of them are failing, and some of them will succeed. And we will not be at the top table unless we can transform the dynamism in our economy. And that goes for the UK, whether we're in or out of the euro area. And to do that, we have to give up some things. I'm nearly 60 years old, and so in a sense, giving up things isn't going to hurt me very much. It's the people in their 30s and the 40s who are going to have to give up certain privileges that they have to produce the disruption, to produce the dynamism for our continent to succeed. And if we don't succeed and we're not at the top table, that'll be bad for us, but it'll be worse for the world. Thank you.